This video from Ukraine's Interior Ministry, and it shows a city on the country's northeastern border, about 2 hours drive from Kharkiv. There is a lot of video that we are seeing on social media, but we are keeping to official, verified sources for you this morning. This video from Ukraine's National Border Guard Service. It is said to be surveillance camera video. That's why it's silent. But as you can see, a road near the border with Belarus, and you can see there what Ukrainian officials say is a column of Russian armor crossing into Ukrainian territory from the north. Now, this video from the Ukrainian Border Guard Service once again, but it is from the south. And officials say it shows Russian military trucks and other forces crossing into Ukraine from Crimea, which, of course, Russia invaded in 2014. Note the distinctive white slashes and the Zs painted on the vehicles. What military experts say that is to enable the troops to identify, distinguish each other in the cases of combat. The Russian assault has been underway now for about 8 hours. This is what the president of the country, Volodymyr Zelensky, told the people of his nation. He delivered a speech as the attack began. Now, it is in Ukrainian. It is not translated. But what you'll see on the left of your screen is a rough match of what the president is saying.
Не лише бомби, але й фейки. Важливо отримувати правду з офіційних джерел. Сьогодні Росія розпочала вторгнення в Україну. Путін розпочав війну з Україною, з усім демократичним світом. Він хоче знищити мою державу. Він хоче знищити нашу державу. Усе те, що ми будували, заради чого живемо. Звертаюсь до всіх українців, в першу чергу, до українських військових, які вже
Volodymyr Zelensky as he addressed the people of Ukraine. Next to Russian President Vladimir Putin, confirming in a televised address that his Russian forces are indeed attacking Ukraine and warning the West against intervening. You're going to hear the voice of the translator here.
Anyone who tries to intervene, to be a threat to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be fast and give you such consequences you will never face again, and you faced again in your history. We're ready to use any development. Every decision can be made.
Chilling words from Russia's president. Obviously a pre-recorded address. He was in the same location, in the same clothing where we saw and heard him earlier in the week as he announced that the invasion was underway from 3 sides of the Ukrainian border. Margaret Evans leads our CBC News team reporting on this attack. She is in Kyiv. We saw Margaret last hour, but as I mentioned, Margaret has been ordered into the underground area, the basement parking garage of her hotel. Margaret, why don't you explain the story, where you are and what has happened?
Well, Heather, shortly after you and I were speaking, as you mentioned, I went back to the hotel to kind of warm up a little bit. And just in my room, we had an announcement over the loudspeaker saying it was not a drill. Everybody, please, go downstairs to the parking garage, which has been set up as kind of a shelter for the people in the hotel. It's not the first time that this happened. It happened when the shelling started we started to first hear explosions earlier in the morning. I wasn't down here at that time, but it's there's coffee. People are remaining calm. A lot of journalists, some people who are not, because people are on the move. So we've seen a lot of people coming to the hotel in recent days from the east, fearing, I think, an invasion and trying to move further west. And now we've seen a lot of people leaving as well. So there's this kind of flow of people coming through. Coming downstairs, we were simply told that they have had another warning of potential airstrike. So they will have heard the air sirens go off.
Well, Margaret, I'm very glad to be speaking to you from a safe location. Obviously, that is the first and foremost our concern for you as we talk about this story. The attack now, as I mentioned, about 7 hours old. Can you bring us the details as you know them, as the artillery fire began and the tanks moved in. Tell us about the attack itself.
Well, here in Kyiv, people started to hear a few thumps and thuds and bangs, and some coming from the main airport. Of course, we then started to hear about all of these different attacks across the country, and have since been told by the leadership here, President Zelensky often taking to video messages on Twitter, basically, and of course from the Ministry of the Interior as well, the Foreign Minister, they're saying that what is happening is that the Russian forces are deliberately targeting infrastructure, airports, that kind of thing, and border post troop gathering areas. And we've also heard, or they've said, that there are 3 different points of entry that they have been tracking the Russian troop movements into. We're not hearing here a lot about answering fire from the Ukrainians. I mean, we've heard air defense missiles and things like that, but we don't have a sense of what kind of resistance from Kyiv, in any case, is taking place, if any at all. The president has urged people to be calm, that he's imposed martial law. He's telling people to stay in place, not to try to move around, but people are quite panicky. Not everybody. Some people are saying, well, we're just going to sit and wait this out, and this is our land, and we're not going to leave it.
That's such an important point. Our land and not going to leave it. Land that they voted overwhelmingly for, that independent nation, 1991. I'm wondering, as you have been speaking to them, Margaret, in this growing tense atmosphere when really it seemed like there would be some military invasion, what is your sense about what is at stake for the people of Ukraine and how they view the consequences of this for them?
You know, I spoke yesterday with a reservist, a man in his 30s, who was a member of the Territorial Defense Forces who'd been called up. This happened as the country was preparing, and you got the sense that things were getting serious. And he talked about his role and his desire and what he thought this fight was about. And he said, I want people to know in the West that this is actually a fight about democracy. It's about the rule of law. This isn't a fight over land, even though, of course, people want to keep their land. It is their country. But he said this is about something bigger than that. This is about shared human values and civilization. And I think that that's something that people feel very strongly, and they perhaps feel it even more so because of that, rather chilling speech that Vladimir Putin gave on Monday, in which he basically seemed to be denying the right of Ukraine to exist, saying it never really had existed as an independent state. And of course, this is something that has been developing since 2014, not the independent state, but the sense of being able to choose their path, and that, those scenes of protest that we saw in 2014 when people came out to protest. And one of the reasons they were protesting was because the pro-Russian president at the time had wiped out, torn up an association agreement with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. And that's all the way back then. And 8 years later, we're still having this kind of tug of war where people feel caught here between the West and Russia, and they say, we simply want to live our lives. Please leave us alone. A lot of people have said that to me, and they're angry about it, kind of feeling helpless, but also angry.
Margaret, thank you. You've been our CBC voice through so many conflicts and on so many significant stories. We'll look forward to your reporting on this at this watershed moment for Ukraine and for Europe, and indeed for the world order. And we'll be with Margaret Evans for updated information as we go back to her. Just to bring you up to date on a couple of things, as we bring in our Moscow correspondent, I can tell you that Ukraine's president cut diplomatic ties with Moscow, has declared martial law, as we look live at there, the Independence Square in Kyiv, which is the capital. We've been hearing some new statements from the Kremlin. I'm going to get to those, but let me bring in our Moscow correspondent, Briar Stewart, who's in Rostov-on-Don. And Briar, we saw those as many as 190,000 Russian forces building up around those three sides of the Ukrainian border. And just before 5 o'clock local time this morning, they moved in. Where you are you seeing signs of any action? What is happening there at Rostov-on-Don?
Well, where we are, Heather, is about 120 kilometers away from the border. And we came here a number of days ago because this is one of the locations where you had separatist forces backed by Russia evacuating people from Donetsk and Luhansk. So they were pushing people out into these areas in advance of this invasion, and that's why we were here. And all throughout the week, we'd seen tanks and heavy artillery and just huge pieces of military equipment head toward the Ukrainian border, along with soldiers. Right now, we're not seeing any of that. Life here is very much continuing as normal. That being said, I think there is a big sense of disbelief among a lot of Russians that it has come to this, that there is actually a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I think there is a lot of anxiety as well among people, not only for what's going on in Ukraine, because I mean, so many people have relatives and really close connections to that country, but anxiety about the future. We know that the European Union and the US, Canada are all warning about very tough sanctions, and people here are wondering just where this will all lead.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Briar, if we could. Just getting some statements out of the Kremlin. So again, this is Russian information, and we put it through that lens. But this is, according to the Kremlin, exactly what we were talking about last hour. This military operation is to pursue the two aims that Vladimir Putin has set out, which are the demilitarization and the denazification of Ukraine. That's an important thing to explain to people, I think, this attempt to portray Eastern Ukraine as a hotbed of neo-Nazism. So you can talk about that further, but that's part of the statement, that Putin will decide how long the military operation lasts based on its progress and on those two aims. And he does say, according to Kremlin representatives, that Putin will meet later today with the leaders of Russia's biggest companies in terms of preparing for sanctions. According to the Kremlin, there are enough safety cushions to survive market volatility and any sort of sanctions that the West may impose. So as you listen to that kind of Kremlin response, what do you make of that? Nothing that would seem unexpected in those statements, I would venture.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to touch on there. I mean, you mentioned market volatility. I can tell you that the Russian stock market here has crashed today. It was down 40% at one point. And the president had been saying kind of over the last few days, certainly in that speech on Monday and again in the pre-recorded speech this morning, that, look, the West and Europe, they were going to sanction us anyway. If the sanctions come, they were inevitable, whether or not we launched this invasion or not. And speaking of the invasion, the Kremlin is really trying to portray this as a specific operation against the Donbass, so in eastern Ukraine. And when that video message of Putin was played this morning, that's exactly what he said. We've launched a special operation in Donbass. And they're really trying to build this as just an effort to help Donetsk and Luhansk and the separatist fighters who they've been helping since 2014 there, trying to basically establish control over that entire area. But of course, as he was talking about the Donbass, you had military units all around Ukraine beginning to launch missiles at military infrastructure. And something that the Kremlin and also politicians and journalists working for state media have been saying today is Ukrainians can just stay calm. This is an effort against military infrastructure, airports. We're not targeting civilians. But of course, we know that that's not how war works, and we're hearing so many reports about casualties and just the explosions and the uncertainty ahead. We know that there are troops, infantry pouring into Ukraine at the moment from a number of different sides, and there is really this kind of attempt by the Kremlin, aided enormously by state media here, to downplay all of that. They're really just talking about the Donbass, mostly on the television channels here, and really trying to minimize the rest of the operation.
That is the latest that we're hearing from the Kremlin, but all of this was preceded, Breyer, by the speech from Vladimir Putin earlier to announce that the invasion, the attack was underway. And that included very strong language, obviously casting aside any condemnation from the West, any threat of further sanctions from the West, laying out the fact that the invasion is underway, but also the warning to the West. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. His words, anyone who tries to interfere with us, or even more so, to create threats for our country and our people, must know that Russia's response will be immediate and will lead you to such consequences as you have never before experienced in your history. What does he mean by that?
Oh, well, Heather, that is just so disturbing on so many levels to hear because, I mean, you know, right now we have a war in Ukraine and, you know, as terrible as that is, the other concern that people have right now is how much larger is it going to get? Is it going to become a European war? I mean, you have Poland right there, a NATO country, and what happens if, you know, things move in that direction and NATO gets involved? And so I think that's on a lot of people's minds, in addition to the sanctions. And you know, the sanctions that they released a few days ago were targeted at certain companies and oligarchs. And I think you have average Russians now just wondering how this is going to affect them. Are they going to be able to travel freely? What is going to happen with their bank accounts? The ruble has lost a significant amount of its value. So how is that going to work? And then just what other kind of retribution is headed this way? There's not a huge anti-war protest movement here, like a visible protest movement. That's because the Russian state has worked so hard to crack down on protesters, arresting them. But there is certainly a lot of people, as I said, that are very much against this. There is an activist calling for protests to be held in Russian cities across the country tonight at 7 o'clock. She's urging people to come out because this is a country that she says is in agony at the moment over all of this. But it'll be interesting to see just how many people take to the streets. There was one single person holding a sign in Moscow today, and that person was detained. So that's the kind of environment it is, and that's why it's so hard for people who are very much against what they're seeing now to come out and speak publicly about it.
Breyer, thank you very much.